Before it became a classic, Superman the movie from 1978 was nearly a cinematic disaster. From flying flops to Marlon Brando's bizarre demands, the behind-the-scenes story is as wild as anything Lex Luthor could dream up. And even Darth Vader had an unlikely role in helping to shape the Man of Steel. Ready to see what they didn't want you to know? Luckily, X-ray vision is not required, as we cover 20 weird facts about Superman the movie.
Number 1. He wasn't the first choice, but he was the right one.
Before Christopher Reeve became the Man of Steel, the producers launched one of the most chaotic casting searches in Hollywood history. They didn't just look for an actor, they went after legends. Paul Newman was offered the role, not just of Superman, but also Lex Luthor or Jor-El. He turned them all down, even after being offered up to $4 million. Robert Redford passed too. He felt he was simply too famous, his face too well known to convincingly play the last son of Krypton. Sylvester Stallone, fresh off Rocky, desperately wanted the role. But according to some reports, Marlon Brando didn't want him involved, and may have helped block his casting. Arnold Schwarzenegger also lobbied hard, but the producers dismissed him quickly. His accent and physique weren't what they had in mind. And again, Brando may have weighed in. And it gets weirder. Neil Diamond wanted to be Superman. Yes, Neil Diamond. So did Elton John. Both were politely ignored. Bruce Jenner, now Caitlyn Jenner, actually auditioned and was even briefly considered before bowing out to do Can't Stop the Music. The casting list became a who's who of Hollywood and beyond. Muhammad Ali, Al Pacino, Clint Eastwood, Dustin Hoffman, Steve McQueen, James Caan, Nick Nolte, Christopher Walken, even a dentist who happened to be married to someone on the production team. No one seemed quite right. So after chasing every star in the galaxy, the producers finally looked down to earth. They opened auditions to unknowns. Over 200 hopefuls tried on the cape. And then came Christopher Reeve. He wasn't a household name, but when he looked into the camera during his screen test and calmly said, "Good evening, Miss Lane," the room went silent. Producers exchanged glances. Director Richard Donner leaned forward. Writer Tom Mankiewicz later recalled they didn't need to say a word. They both knew. They had just found Superman.
Number 2. They tried everything, but he still couldn't fly. They had a slogan, "You'll believe a man can fly," but making that slogan a reality? That was a monumental challenge. In 1978, no one had ever attempted superhero flying effects at this scale. Early tests failed spectacularly and cost millions. They tried shooting a Superman dummy, launched from a catapult. The result? Terrible, awful, impossible to watch. They experimented with old-school animation, cartoons superimposed on cityscapes, only to find it looking unconvincing, cheesy even. They even built a remote-controlled model plane, painted like Superman, but it flew like, well, a toy. Then came the breakthrough. Visual effects wizard Zoran Perisic invented the Zoptic system, a precision front projection technique using synchronized zoom lenses on both projector and camera. As the background zoomed, Reeve appeared to move through the sky, while actually standing perfectly still in front of a retroreflective screen. This in-camera trick gave the illusion of forward flight with breathtaking realism. As soon as the crew saw the first successful test, they erupted in applause. Some even cried. Without Zoptic, Richard Donner later admitted, "We had no movie." Here's a fascinating detail you might miss. To amplify Lois Lane's sense of wonder during those flying scenes, Margot Kidder filmed many of her close-ups without wearing her contact lenses. One day she scratched her eye and couldn't wear them. Her gaze became naturally wide and childlike. Donner loved the effect so much, he told her to leave the contacts out for the rest of shooting. That unplanned touch made her reaction feel authentic and added magic to the moment. The cost? Early failures reportedly burned through over $2 million just chasing techniques that didn't work. But the payoff was worth it. Audiences believed. The tagline wasn't just a promise, it became a truth. Number 3.
Darth Vader was Superman's secret weapon. Christopher Reeve was a tall, classically trained 26-year-old, but he was far from a superhero when he showed up to audition for Superman. Director Richard Donner saw the slender actor and thought, he's too skinny. Reeve promised to change that. He refused padding or prosthetics, and instead underwent an intense physical transformation under the guidance of former British weightlifting champion David Prowse, the towering figure who portrayed Darth Vader. Reeve's daily routine? Morning runs, 2 hours of weightlifting, 90 minutes on a trampoline. He doubled his food intake and ramped up to 6 protein shakes a day. Over a few months, he bulked up from 188 pounds to around 212, adding approximately 24 to 30 pounds of pure muscle. Some reports even suggest the gain could have been closer to 40 or 45 pounds. But Reeve wasn't just building physique. He studied Cary Grant films to shape his bumbling, mild-mannered Clark Kent demeanor, the opposite of his upright, powerful Superman persona. When Donner screened Reeve's test, the look, the posture, the presence was unmistakable. He had become Superman. One amusing behind-the-scenes note: the producers were so concerned about Superman's anatomy in the tights that they had Reeve wear a special codpiece. Margot Kidder recalled producer Alexander Salkind asking Donner, "Is it big enough? Do we need to make it bigger?"
Number 4. The offer Donner couldn't refuse. Richard Donner wasn't the first choice to direct Superman. In fact, he wasn't even in the first dozen. The producers, Alexander and Ilya Salkind, had already gone down a long and increasingly chaotic list of big-name directors. They courted Steven Spielberg right after Jaws, but his fee was too high. Francis Ford Coppola passed. So did William Friedkin, fresh off The Exorcist. Even Bond director Guy Hamilton was briefly hired, until they moved production to England, where Hamilton couldn't work due to tax exile. And then there was Sam Peckinpah. During a story meeting, the Wild Bunch director reportedly pulled out a gun, slammed it on the table, and growled at the producers. "You'd better shut up, kid. What do you know about making movies?" Needless to say, that meeting didn't end with a handshake. By the time they approached Donner, they were out of options and getting desperate. So they made him an offer that was hard to ignore. They told him Marlon Brando was already cast as Jor-El. Gene Hackman had signed on as Lex Luthor. And the script? It was written by The Godfather's Mario Puzo. Then came the clincher, a $1 million directing fee, nearly 10 times what Donner had earned for The Omen, and one of the highest paychecks for a director at the time. It was bold, it was risky, and it worked. Donner said yes, drawn in by the cast, the scope, and the chance to do something Hollywood had never done before: make people believe a man could fly. Number 5. The secret behind Krypton's glowing costumes. Krypton's shimmering council robes looked futuristic, even mystical, glowing with an almost ghostly light. But the effect wasn't digital or high-tech, it was pure movie magic. The costumes were made from Scotchlite, a reflective fabric embedded with microscopic glass beads. It's the same material once used on old cinema screens and road signs, designed to reflect light directly back toward its source. Under normal lighting, the robes appeared flat and silvery. But when hit with a spotlight placed near the camera lens, the fabric reflected the beam straight back, creating that dazzling, glowing effect, right there on camera, with no visual effects added later. Interestingly, the choice of material was a happy accident. The reflective effect was first noticed during flying tests, when bits of 3M screen material began to glitter unexpectedly under projection lights. Costume designer Yvonne Blake, recognizing the visual potential, adapted this same material into the Kryptonian wardrobe, giving the elders of Krypton their ethereal look. And it was all thanks to a roll of screen fabric and some very smart lighting design. Number 6. How they turned one actor into another. Jeff East played teenage Clark Kent in the Smallville scenes, but if you thought he looked a lot like Christopher Reeve, that was no accident. To make the transition between young Clark and adult Superman seamless, the makeup team went all in. East sat in the chair for up to 3 hours a day, undergoing a transformation that included a prosthetic nose, a custom hairpiece, and subtle facial contouring, all designed to make him resemble Reeve as closely as possible. But the resemblance didn't stop at appearances. In post-production, every one of Jeff East's lines was overdubbed by Christopher Reeve himself. Donner wanted vocal continuity between young and grown-up Clark, and Reeve's voice had already become distinct by the time they finalized the edit. So what you see on screen is Jeff East's performance, but it's Reeve's voice and Reeve's presence they wanted the audience to feel from start to finish. Number 7. The tricks behind young Clark's super feats. While Jeff East didn't get to use his real voice on screen, he definitely showed off Clark Kent's early powers and took some real risks to do it. In one memorable Smallville scene, teenage Clark punts a football into the sky. The crew buried a high-powered air cannon underground and launched a wooden football straight up, blasting it out of frame. A simple, convincing effect done entirely in camera. But the real danger came in the next stunt: Clark racing a speeding train. To pull it off, East was suspended on a crane rig attached to a moving truck, mimicking a mid-air sprint alongside real train tracks. During rehearsal, the rig swung him dangerously close to the train, and it took a quick grab from actor Richard Hackman, Gene Hackman's brother, to prevent a serious accident. East even tore multiple thigh muscles during the stunt and spent weeks recovering. But the scene made it into the final cut, and it's still one of the film's most memorable moments of Superboy in action, long before the cape ever came into play. Number 8. Richard Donner's Superman set was pure mayhem. When Richard Donner took the job directing Superman, he didn't just sign on for one film. He was tasked with shooting 2 movies at the same time. The producers had decided to film Superman and Superman 2 back-to-back, a bold, money-saving strategy that quickly spiraled into chaos. At one point, Donner was juggling 7 different shooting units at once. The sets were spread across Pinewood Studios and various UK locations, so Donner had to zip between crews in a golf cart, barely keeping up with the daily madness. Despite the circus, Donner kept the team focused with one unusual tool: signs reading verisimilitude posted all over the set. The word means the appearance of truth, and it was Donner's personal mantra, a reminder that even in a story about flying men and alien crystals, the audience had to believe it was real. And while Donner spent most of the shoot behind the camera, he couldn't resist a small cameo. During a scene where Clark Kent stops to watch TV footage of Superman saving the day, a man in the crowd turns and speaks to him. That man? Richard Donner himself, slipping into his own film for a blink-and-you'll-miss-it moment right in the middle of Metropolis. Number 9. The bald truth about Lex Luthor's hair. Gene Hackman was cast as Lex Luthor, Superman's arch-nemesis and one of the most iconic bald villains in comic book history. There was just one problem. Hackman refused to go bald. He didn't want to shave his head, and he didn't even want to wear a bald cap for most of the film. So director Richard Donner got creative. Instead of fighting the actor, he rewrote the character. Lex Luthor, in Donner's version, became a vain criminal mastermind who wore a different, ridiculous wig in nearly every scene, a clever workaround that actually added to the character's eccentricity. Eventually, Hackman agreed to wear a bald cap, but only once. In the final prison scene, Luthor removes his own wig, revealing his true, bald self in defeat. It's the only moment in the film where he appears as the classic comic book Lex. But the story doesn't end there. Hackman also didn't want to shave his mustache, so Donner made a deal. If you shave yours, I'll shave mine. Hackman agreed. The next day, he showed up clean-shaven, and Donner greeted him by peeling off a fake mustache he'd been wearing the whole time, just for the gag. Hackman laughed. The standoff was over, and Lex Luthor's hair, or lack of it, became part of movie history. Number 10. How a green bagel almost played Jor-El. Before Marlon Brando finally became Jor-El, the Superman producers were determined to land a superstar. They offered the role to legends like Paul Newman, Charlton Heston, and even Orson Welles, but all turned it down. When Brando expressed interest, everything clicked. But casting him wasn't easy. Brando demanded a massive payday, $3.7 million up front and 11.75% of the box office gross. When the film earned nearly $300 million, Brando's take soared to about $19 million, dwarfing Christopher Reeve's $250,000 salary. That deal gave Brando star billing, but during early meetings, he nearly turned the role into a punchline. He joked that Jor-El could just be a floating green bagel or a shape-shifting suitcase while his voice narrated off-screen. Thankfully, Donner chuckled and got him to appear on camera instead. Once filming began, Brando refused to memorize his lines. He had his dialogue printed on cue cards, which he sometimes scattered around the set, including in Baby Kal-El's crib, so he could casually read off them in character. The result? An iconic Jor-El who cost millions, carried the weight of cinematic prestige, and nearly didn't show up, as long as a bagel could speak for it. Number 11. What set Margot Kidder apart from the competition? Casting Lois Lane was nearly as complicated as casting Superman himself. The producers considered an A-list lineup of actresses for the role. Shirley MacLaine, Liza Minnelli, Carrie Fisher, Jessica Lange, and even Barbara Streisand were all discussed at various points. Actresses like Susan Blakely, Anne Archer, and Leslie Ann Warren screen-tested alongside Christopher Reeve. The final decision came down to 2 very different contenders, Stockard Channing, hot off Grease, and Margot Kidder, a lesser-known Canadian actress. Channing was strong, but producers worried her version of Lois came across a little too tough. One even joked she would have eaten Superman for breakfast. Kidder, on the other hand, walked into the casting office and tripped over a doorway. Instead of being embarrassed, she laughed it off with such goofy charm that Donner instantly saw something special. That accidental stumble sealed the deal. Her klutzy confidence, sharp wit, and natural chemistry with Reeve made her the perfect Lois, both fierce and vulnerable, fearless and funny. And just like that, Superman had found his match. Number 12. The rewrite that saved Superman. Before filming could begin, Superman had a script, a massive 300-page epic written by the Godfather author Mario Puzo. The problem? It was long, tonally inconsistent, and packed with over-the-top camp, including a Kryptonian villain named Crew L, and even a proposed cameo from Kojak, where Superman mistakes him for Lex Luthor and gets told, "Who loves you, baby?" When Richard Donner read it, he was horrified. He said, "It was the longest thing I'd ever read, and it didn't feel like Superman." So he decided to start fresh. To convince screenwriter Tom Mankiewicz, a James Bond veteran, to help rewrite the script, Donner pulled a stunt straight out of the comics. When Mankiewicz arrived at his house, Donner sprinted across the lawn in a full Superman costume, pretending to fly. Mankiewicz burst out laughing and signed on. He threw out the camp and helped Donner reshape the film's tone, one that respected the character, balanced fantasy with heart, and laid the groundwork for every superhero movie that came after. Number 13. The take was ruined because it was too good. Originally, Jerry Goldsmith was tapped to score Superman. He'd worked with Donner before on The Omen and even had his music featured in early trailers. But schedule conflicts forced him to drop out at the last minute. That's when John Williams entered the scene, and quickly became indispensable. When the London Symphony Orchestra began recording Williams's main theme, Donner was so moved that he ran onto the soundstage mid-recording and shouted out, "Genius, genius," so loud he disrupted the take and had to start over. Williams captured the emotional scope perfectly, the triumphant fanfares, the tender theme between Superman and Lois, and the musical spices that make you feel Superman. This iconic score helped earn the film an Oscar nomination for Best Original Score and remains one of the most unforgettable superhero themes in cinematic history. Number 14. The role that slipped away from Goldie Hawn. Miss Tessmacher, Lex Luthor's glamorous and slightly daffy sidekick, was always meant to bring comic relief and sex appeal to Superman. But the role didn't originally belong to Valerie Perrine. Director Richard Donner first wanted Goldie Hawn, who had the comedic timing and star power to pull it off. When her asking price proved too high, the producers turned to Anne Margaret, who briefly signed on. But then came the switch. Valerie Perrine, a rising star and former model, expressed interest in the role and was willing to work for significantly less. The producers, always budget-conscious, made the change behind Donner's back. He wasn't thrilled, but he admitted later that Perrine brought her own charms to the character. In the end, her version of Miss Tessmacher struck the perfect balance of sultry, silly, and strangely sympathetic, making her one of the film's most memorable supporting characters. Number 15. The time twist ending that was never meant for this movie. The famous ending of Superman the movie, where Superman flies around the Earth to reverse time, wasn't originally written for that film at all. It was actually meant to serve as the climax of Superman 2. Because the two films were being shot simultaneously, the original plan was for Superman to end on a cliffhanger, with the Phantom Zone villains escaping, while the time reversal trick was saved for the sequel's emotional finale. But then production problems hit. The Salkind producers halted work on Superman 2 to focus on completing the first film, leaving director Richard Donner in need of a show-stopping ending. With no better option, he lifted the planned climax from the sequel and placed it at the end of Superman 1. As a result, when Donner was later fired from the sequel, the theatrical cut of Superman 2 used a different resolution entirely. Number 16. The retro visual effect that still holds up today. Before Superman even appears on screen, the movie delivers a punch of pure cinematic spectacle. Those sweeping three-dimensional titles that seem to fly through space. They weren't just stylish, they were technically groundbreaking. The sequence was created by R. Greenberg Associates using a blend of motion-controlled cameras and slit-scan photography, the same analog technique famously used in 2001: A Space Odyssey a decade earlier. But while 2001 used slit-scan to simulate a journey through time and space, Superman turned the effect into a graphic showstopper. Every streaking letter and glowing arc was captured in camera, long before CGI existed. The process was slow, expensive, and required extreme precision, but the result was unforgettable. Those titles didn't just announce the film, they made a promise. You're about to witness something epic. Number 17. The original Superman and Lois were hiding in plain sight. If you blink during the Smallville train scene, you might miss one of the film's cleverest Easter eggs, and its most touching tribute. As young Clark Kent races the train at super speed, a little girl inside the carriage tugs at her parents, urging them to look.
She's actually a young Lois Lane, though no one knows it yet. But it's the parents who are the real surprise. They're played by Kirk Alyn and Noel Neill, the very first live-action Superman and Lois Lane. Alyn wore the cape in the 1948 and 1950 Superman serials, and Neill played Lois in both the serials and later on the Adventures of Superman TV show. It's a beautiful passing of the torch. The original Man of Steel and his leading lady silently watching the future fly by. And, in true superhero fashion, not quite believing what they just saw.
Number 18. The Lost Lex Luthor Trap You Never Saw in Theaters. In the original Superman theatrical release, Lex Luthor lures the Man of Steel into his lair with barely a challenge. But that wasn't always the plan. A full sequence was filmed, and later cut, in which Luthor tests Superman with a deadly gauntlet of traps deep underground. Responding to a dog whistle frequency, Superman descends into Luthor's hideout, only to be met with automatic gunfire, a flamethrower, and a blast of sub-zero ice, all of which he walks through without flinching. This bullets, fire, and ice sequence was eventually restored in extended TV cuts, giving fans a glimpse of what Donner originally intended. Not just a villain with brains, but one who tested the limits of Superman's power.
Number 19. Lex Luthor almost went to a comedy legend. Long before Gene Hackman stepped into Lex Luthor's shoes, the role nearly went to some wildly unexpected names. The Salkinds wanted a big-name star to counterbalance the unknown newcomer playing the Man of Steel, so they aimed high, reaching out to actors like George Kennedy, Jack Nicholson, and even comedy legend Gene Wilder. Dustin Hoffman was offered the part too, but turned it down. Eventually, they landed Gene Hackman, an Oscar-winning dramatic powerhouse, not exactly the obvious choice for a flamboyant comic book villain. Hackman was skeptical at first, worried the role might damage his serious career, but director Richard Donner changed his mind. With his boundless energy and passion for the story, Donner convinced Hackman that this wasn't just a comic book film, it was something special, and with that, one of cinema's most iconic villains found his face.
Number 20. Christopher Reeve wasn't impressed with his co-star. Marlon Brando wasn't one to play by the rules, especially not on the set of Superman. True to his method, he refused to memorize scripts. Instead, the crew placed cue cards all around the set, even tucked into the diaper of the baby actor playing Kal-El. As Brando cradled the infant Superman, he was actually reading his lines off that diaper. A teenage production assistant, far from an experienced co-star, became Brando's personal aide, responsible for coaxing him out of his trailer each day. His name? Unknown. Brando never learned it. He just called him Rocky, every time. Christopher Reeve, who had idolized Brando, found himself disillusioned by the legend. In a 1982 interview, Reeve admitted he felt Brando had phoned in his performance, even armed with cue cards. Reeve bluntly labeled the performance indifferent, noting Brando seemed in it for the paycheck rather than the craft. That's our look behind the cape and into the making of Superman, the movie. Which fact stood out the most? Drop a comment and let us know. And if you enjoyed it, like, subscribe, and share. It helps more than a phone booth in a crisis. Thanks for watching.